looking at a lot of things that we've been talking about with Easter. Of course, we just celebrated Easter not that long ago, and we're going to look today in John chapter number 20. The verse I want us to really focus in on is the end of verse 27, where Jesus says, "And be not faithless, but believing." I think a lot of us are in that state. A lot of us are in that state of being faithless. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Let's break it down here. Let's define what faith means and what faithless means. And that'll help us to understand what Jesus is telling us here. Faithless is lacking in faith or trust. It's not believing. Faithless is a lack of faith. Faith, then, we read in Hebrews 11:1, which we commonly say is the definition of faith. Paul writes, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen." We see two parts to this definition of faith here. The first part is the substance of things hoped for. That means believing and trusting that God will fulfill his promises. Of course, the Bible is full of the promises of God. Promises of our salvation if we believe in Jesus. Promising to never leave us or forsake us. We can go on. But faith is simply trusting in the promises of God. That's the substance. And then he says the evidence of things not seen. Faith demonstrates that God is real, and his word, what we have as the Bible today, can indeed be relied upon. Even though or even when things come up that we don't understand. I don't understand how salvation works, but I put my faith and my trust and rely on God's promise of salvation through our faith in Jesus. Now, Jesus here in John chapter 20, to give a quick background here, because this is a long chapter and I'm not going to read the whole thing for you. But in chapter 20, verses 1 through 10, we see here now the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus has died on the cross. He's been in the tomb the 3 days. He's now resurrected. And we see in verses 2 through 10 of John chapter 20, we see Mary Magdalene going to the tomb to anoint Jesus, because remember he had passed away at right as the Sabbath was starting. So they basically just covered him up, tossed him in the tomb, rolled the stone away, and rolled the stone to cover the tomb, and went about their way. And Mary came early on Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning, to anoint Jesus' body. And as she got to the tomb, she saw that the stone was rolled away. Now, this would have been a great stone, and surely bigger than she would be able to move herself, but she saw the stone was gone. And the scriptures tell us that she ran back to the disciples and told them, and Peter and John had ran out to the tomb and saw indeed the tomb was empty. And then they went their way. I don't know if they believed in what happened, believed that Jesus was resurrected, or if they thought that Jesus was stolen, or maybe he wasn't really dead, or the religious leaders did something to hide him. Whatever. They went about their way. And then in verses 11 through 18, we see that while the rest left, Mary Magdalene stayed behind, and she had an encounter with Jesus. Jesus appeared to her and told her to go to the disciples and tell them what happened. And we see here in Luke chapter 24, I want to jump over to the Gospel of Luke here, because in this section in Luke 24, it gives us a little bit more detail as to what happened. See, Luke 24, verses 9 through 11. "And returned from the sepulchre, and told all these things unto the 11, and to all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene, and Joanna, and Mary the mother of James, and other women that were with them, which told these things to the apostles. and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. The disciples didn't believe at that time. They were faithless. They didn't believe. They didn't believe the message that the women brought them. They didn't believe. That's what we have to think about. That's what we have to notice here. And then we see in verses, back here in Gospel of John again, verses 19 through 23, Jesus had appeared to the disciples. He said, the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you. And when he had so said, he showed unto them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Remember, they didn't believe it. They didn't believe he was alive. But now that same day that Mary and the other women came back saying that they had seen Jesus, when Jesus now appeared to the disciples, and they believed. But then we get down here to verses 24 through 26, and this is after Jesus is now left. We find out that Thomas, one of the disciples, wasn't there. I don't know where he was at. If he was out fishing again, if he was out, I don't know where he was, but he wasn't with the disciples. And Jesus had appeared, and when Thomas came back, the disciples told him the good news that Jesus is alive, and Thomas didn't believe him. In fact, he even went as far in verse 25. Then the other disciples therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. That's where so many of us today are. We're at that spot where we don't believe Jesus. Unless we see with our own eyes, we don't believe it. You know, all the time, I look at social media quite a bit because that's where majority of my ministry is at. And a lot of times somebody will put on there, hey, this breaking news story just happened, and someone will say, proof, where's the link? Wherever. Because people today are so conditioned that there's so much fake news going on around there, so many false reports that we don't believe it unless there's proof of what happened. We're going to get to that in a minute. But then, 8 days later, 8 days, the disciples are worshiping Jesus, are excited because Jesus is alive. And Thomas is probably sitting there in a corner just like this because he don't believe it. And 8 days later, Jesus appears to him. And Thomas said, My Lord and my God. And Jesus told him, he said, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Now wait a minute, Jesus is singling Thomas out here, but every single one of them disciples and everybody else that was hanging out in that upper room with them are in the same exact boat because none of them believed it until they saw it themselves. So Jesus here, he's saying, you believe because you've seen me. He said, blessed are they that have not seen and yet believed. We're in that spot. We're in that spot where we haven't seen. I haven't seen Jesus stand in front of me that I could reach out and touch him. None of us have. What's that going to do for us? Well, if we jump down here to verses 30 and 31 of John chapter 20, he says, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing ye might have life through his name. These things, everything that John wrote in his gospel, you could even go as far as saying everything that's written in the Bible was written so that we might believe that Jesus is the Messiah. No, we won't see him face to face. That's where faith comes in. That's where faith comes in. That's where we have to decide that we're going to rely on and take the words of God in this Bible and believe it as the truth. and then live our life demonstrating that we believe that truth. Be not faithless. We may not see Jesus face to face, but we can see what he's done in the Bible. We can talk with other Christians and see what he's done in their lives. That's the faith we need to have. That's the faith. That's how we need to build our faith, and that's what we need to go out and we need to do, is to go and believe in Jesus. What's holding you back from believing? What's holding you to be faithless instead of having faith in Jesus? Think about that as you go through this day.